Welcome to the final video in our Introduction to Ethics course. Now that we've outlined the 4 quadrants of the Potter box and described how the system itself works, it's time to apply it by evaluating a well-known case study from the Trinidad and Tobago press. Trinidad and Tobago's Newsday has long been well known for publishing photos of dead bodies and parts of dead bodies on its front page. However, this Independence Day 2009 front page took that habit to a new level, or a new low, depending on whom you asked. Pictured is the body of 1-year-old Nevi Fiona Ramjet, who had been killed in a car crash along with her mother the day before. The front page provoked such outrage from some readers that Newsday felt it necessary to publish an explanation for their action a few days later. Before we look at Newsday's justification, let's evaluate their decision using the 4 quadrants of the Potter box. We'll start with a review of the facts relating to the case, consider the most relevant values, decide which principle or which principles best apply to our decision, and conclude by weighing our loyalties. The details of the accident appear to be no different from so many others that take place in TNT. Baby Nevi's father somehow lost control of the vehicle while driving along the Solomon Hochoy Highway. The car slammed into a pole, spun several times, and then crashed into a concrete barrier. No other vehicles were involved in the accident. More notably, however, the 1-year-old was seated on her mother's lap in the front passenger seat at the time of the accident. She was thrown out of the vehicle and killed instantly. Her mother died several hours later and her father survived the accident. This dangerous and all too common seating arrangement would play a major role in Newsday's decision. Now, Newsday was no doubt motivated by the desire to tell the whole truth of the accident, despite the probability of widespread criticism. They believed that they were obligated to use the story and the image to jar the general public into recognizing the importance of obeying the speed limit and using child safety seats. However, news publishers generally prefer to act in good taste and practice restraint and discretion when handling this sort of content. The possibility of offending and upsetting the public was very real, as was the possibility of doing substantial emotional harm to the child's relatives. Here we already see 2 competing sets of values. Let's see if the ethical principles make this choice any easier. The clash between hurting a few and potentially helping many evokes the principle of utility. It could be reasonably argued that the potential benefit of alerting the public to the importance of child safety seats greatly outweighed the emotional suffering that the photograph would cause for the child's family. That said, could Newsday have achieved the same beneficial result without such a direct graphic image? That question was raised repeatedly by critics after the photo's publication, and it forces us to apply the golden mean. Newsday could have taken a middle road in this situation and published a blurred version of the picture, or a much smaller version, or a picture taken from a greater distance or less revealing angle. Newsday could have employed subtlety to convey meaning and impact, and in doing so, they could have spared the feelings of the child's family. The remaining 3 principles are ill-suited to this case, although I encourage you to argue otherwise in the forums. Social standing and personal attributes aren't a major consideration in this story, so the veil of ignorance doesn't apply directly. Other regarding care seems like an obvious match, but its concerns in this case are already dealt with by the 2 principles we've used. A stance can be argued using the categorical imperative. but it's a relatively simplistic one that doesn't account well for the conflicting concerns. Still, I'd be interested in hearing what the class has to say about applying other principles to this case. We've arrived at the final quadrant with justifications for two different approaches to publishing the photograph, based on the consideration of competing values and principles. As we noted during the last presentation, the Potter box's last two quadrants help us to come to a firmer final decision. Newsday clearly considered their responsibility to the wider public to be the determining factor at this point. They could have also considered toning down the photograph to satisfy their advertisers, who might not have wanted to be associated with such content. However, it could also be argued that the publication of such sensational content could have been beneficial to advertisers. But that is a case for another day. Let's take a quick look at how Newsday responded to the public backlash 2 days later. As we've noted several times during this analysis, Newsday cited concern for the wider public as the primary motivation for the publication of the photo. Here we see a clear example of why the greater good is not necessarily linked to the greater number. The newspaper believes that saving the life of just one child would be worth any distress or offense caused by the photo. The editorial argues at length in favor of the need to shock drivers and parents into the realities of reckless driving and poor safety practices. It makes no apology, but it does try to explain why the newspaper felt that it was doing the right thing. Newsday has been accused of simply hiding behind a facade of public concern in order to peddle exploitative content. In this case, however, the action seemed to have resulted in at least some of the desired impact. We'll never know for sure whether or how many children's lives were actually saved because their parents responded to baby Nevi's picture. But less than 2 weeks later, during the budget presentation, the Trinidad and Tobago government announced new legislative measures aimed at protecting children on the nation's roads. Child safety seats had not been a topic of general or political discussion in the months preceding the publication of the photo. The Potter box has encouraged us to systematically consider every factor that we should deem relevant to our final decision. We can present ethical justifications both for and against the manner in which the photo was published. Our analysis even forced us to consider different approaches to publishing the disturbing image. With our ethical reasoning soundly established, the way forward becomes clearer. I hope that you've enjoyed our introductory presentation on ethics in journalism, and that these lessons prove useful to you in the field. Thanks for joining us.